Wait to see how Jesus can calm the storm inside your mind. In this video, you'll discover what the Bible teaches about anxiety, fear, and the peace that only Christ can give. Stay tuned, because this is not just another message. It's a life-changing truth you don't want to miss. There is a pain no one sees, yet it consumes everything from within. It does not break doors, it does not tear down walls, it makes no sound, and yet it invades the mind, tightens the chest, and steals sleep. Its name is anxiety. And what if I told you that Jesus knows that secret place of torment exactly? Today, you will discover that the peace of Christ is not a distant idea. It is a living presence. There are moments when everything looks normal on the outside, but on the inside, the battle has already begun. The smile stays on the face, the routine stays on the calendar, the demands keep piling up. But in silence, thoughts run wild. What if something goes wrong? What if I can't do it? What if the pain gets worse? What if the future crushes me? Anxiety feeds on those questions. It does not need facts to grow. All it takes is uncertainty, a memory, one bad night of sleep, and it spreads like shadow over light. It was like this for many hearts throughout Scripture. Men and women of faith faced fear, pressure, persecution, and tears. And yet, in the middle of the chaos, there was one truth that never changed. God does not abandon the afflicted. The Lord does not ignore the brokenhearted. He sees what no one else sees. He knows the name of the anguish you try to hide. And in Christ, He offers more than momentary relief. He offers rest for the soul. Think about that for a moment. We are not talking about a superficial cure, as if Jesus simply placed a layer of silence over your pain. No, we are talking about transformation. We are talking about a peace so deep that it begins at the center of your being and spreads until it reaches the most wounded places of the mind. When Jesus enters, fear loses authority. When Jesus speaks, the storm has to listen, and maybe that is the reason you are here, not by accident, not by distraction, but because your soul recognized, even without saying it out loud, that it needs something greater than human strength, something greater than control, something greater than explanations. The answer to your anxious heart is not just to think differently. The answer is to meet the Christ who calls the weary and promises rest to those who are burdened. But what happens when anxiety has already taken up too much space? When the mind has grown used to living on alert? When faith exists, but seems suffocated by fear? That is exactly where the story becomes deeper, because Jesus did not come only for the strong. He came for the broken, not only for those who have everything under control. He came for those who can no longer hold themselves up alone. And now, before we move forward, look at how this truth repeats itself throughout the Bible. God enters where man cannot rule. He speaks where fear falls silent. He touches where pain paralyzes. And when He acts, what seemed impossible begins to change. But this is not the end. It is only the beginning of the revelation. The disciples knew panic too. They were in the boat, surrounded by water, wind, and uncertainty. The night seemed darker than it should have been, and the sea rose as if it wanted to swallow everything. Then came the scene that reveals so much about Jesus and so much about the human heart. While fear was rising, He was sleeping. While they were falling into despair, He remained at peace. That does not mean He was unconcerned. It means He had authority. The storm was high, but it was not above Him. The wind roared, but it did not govern the scene. When the disciples woke Him, Jesus did not answer with a long speech. He gave a command, and the sea obeyed. Peace, be still, remains one of the most powerful phrases ever spoken over chaos. This image is more than an ancient story. It is a portrait of what happens inside us. The anxious heart is like a restless sea. Thoughts rise like waves. Fears crash against reason. Worries grow without asking permission. But the same Christ who spoke to the sea still speaks to the soul, and his voice still has the power to subdue what seems uncontrollable. Maybe you have tried to handle everything on your own. Maybe you have chased control, predictability, security, and immediate answers. But anxiety is cruel precisely because it promises protection and delivers prison. It makes it seem like overthinking will prevent pain, when in reality, it only increases exhaustion. And this is where Jesus confronts our deception. You were not made to carry tomorrow's weight by yourself. There is a difference between prudence and torment. There is a difference between responsibility and inner slavery. Jesus never called his followers to live dominated by constant fear. In Matthew 6, he does not minimize human needs, but he exposes the root problem, a heart divided between trust and fear. That is why he speaks of lilies, birds, and the Father's care, not as empty poetry, but as a reminder that God remains attentive even when the world feels unstable. But there is something even deeper. Anxiety is not only about tomorrow. Often, it also carries the weight of the past, of wounds that have not healed, of words that stayed, of losses that keep echoing. And when the past and the future join forces to attack the present, the soul loses its footing. That is the point where Jesus' voice becomes not only encouragement, but refuge. He does not first ask whether you deserve peace. He offers peace because it is his nature to heal, restore, and sustain. And that changes everything. Because the peace of Christ does not depend on the absence of problems. It is born from the presence of God in the middle of them. The sea may still be moving outside, but something much greater has already begun to happen on the inside. There are pains that hide behind discipline. There are fears that hide behind productivity. There are hearts that keep functioning, but no longer breathe freedom. And maybe that is one of the saddest parts of anxiety. It can make a person look highly active on the outside and deeply exhausted on the inside. Jesus knew that kind of weight. He saw crowds that were weary, oppressed, wounded, and hungry for hope. He saw people crushed by religion, guilt, rejection, and fear. And still, he did not step away. Instead, he drew near. Where others judged, he healed. Where others demanded performance, he offered grace. Where others placed heavy burdens, he said, "Come to me." This invitation is one of the brightest centers of the whole gospel. Come to me, all who are weary and burdened, and I will give you rest. There is no vague promise here. There is a direct call to hearts that are falling apart. Jesus does not say, "Try a little harder." He says, "Come." He does not say, "Prove yourself." He says, "Bring the weight." He does not say, "Just get better." He says, "I will give you rest." And the rest of Christ is not superficial. He does not erase reality, but he changes the way you walk through it. He does not deny the struggle, but he keeps the struggle from ruling your identity. He does not promise a life without affliction, but he promises presence, strength, awe, and peace in the middle of the valley. That means anxiety does not have the final word when Jesus enters the story. Still, there is a real battle between faith and fear. Faith says, "God is with me." Fear says, "What if he forgets me?" Faith says, "The Father knows what I need." Fear says, "What if everything runs out?" Faith says, "He cares for me." Fear says, "I need to control everything or I will fall apart." And that war happens every day, often in the silence of the night. when no one sees the tears or hears the unfinished prayers. That is why Paul wrote about bringing our requests to God with prayer and supplication, and then receiving the peace that surpasses all understanding. Notice the depth of that. Peace does not come because everything has been explained, but because something has been placed before the throne of God. Anxiety wants to keep everything inside. Faith learns how to surrender, and that surrender is not weakness. It is holy yielding. It is the moment when the heart stops pretending it can carry the world and recognizes that only God can do what man cannot. But there is more, because when the soul begins to release the weight, heaven does not answer with silence. Heaven answers with presence, and that is where healing goes deeper. There is a difference between hearing about Jesus and being encountered by Jesus. There is a difference between knowing verses and experiencing their truth in the depths of the soul. When He draws near, something changes, not just around you, but within you. The presence of Christ reorganizes what fear has disorganized. Remember Martha and Mary. Remember Martha's anxiety, busy and troubled, trying to handle everything while Jesus was already there. Mary chose the better part. That contrast is still alive today. The anxious mind wants to run, calculate, predict, and control. But healing begins when the soul sits at Jesus' feet and recognizes that His presence is more necessary than the illusion of control. Anxiety says, "You need to figure everything out now." Jesus says, "Be with me." Anxiety says, "You are alone in this." Jesus says, "I am with you." Anxiety says, "Your future is unstable." Jesus says, "I am the same yesterday, today, and forever." Each of those answers is a blade of light cutting through the darkness of an unsettled mind. And there is something even deeper in the way Christ heals. He does not only speak to the emotion, He treats the root. Many worries are born from wounded identities. When a person does not feel secure, they live on alert. When they do not feel loved, they fear being abandoned. When they do not feel enough, they carry anxiety into every decision. Jesus, however, does not offer only psychological relief. He offers sonship, belonging, and reconciliation with the Father. That is why the healing of Jesus reaches where human advice often cannot touch. He does not merely calm symptoms. He transforms the heart's relationship with God, with time, with fear, and with itself. And when that happens, anxiety begins to lose ground to a trust that once seemed impossible. But before the climax, there must be a necessary confrontation. The anxious soul has to decide whether it will keep feeding fear or begin resting in truth, and that decision is not small. Because every time you choose to trust God instead of sinking into panic, something shifts in the spiritual realm. Something inside you grows stronger. Something that seemed broken begins to realign. So stay until the end of this journey, because the most important part is still ahead. Not just the promise of peace, but the encounter with the one who makes peace defeat the storm. It is time to move into the center of the battle, because every anxiety, at some point, demands a choice. Either you keep obeying fear, or you decide to trust the voice of Jesus above the noise inside. Peter knew that moment. He looked at the impossible, stepped out of the boat, and walked on the water. As long as his eyes stayed on Christ, there was steadiness. But when his attention shifted to the wind, fear began to pull him under. This scene is more than a miracle. It is a mirror, because anxiety does exactly that. It shifts the focus from Jesus' presence to the strength of the storm. And still, look at the grace of Christ. When Peter began to sink, Jesus did not shame him. He did not abandon him. He did not let him disappear. He reached out his hand. That is the image that needs to be engraved in the soul of anyone who struggles with worry. Jesus does not wait for you to walk perfectly before he loves you. He holds you in the very moment your strength begins to fail. But why is that so hard to accept? Because fear always tries to convince the mind that you are alone in the fall. It whispers that no one understands, that no one sees, that no one will reach you in time. Yet the gospel destroys that lie. Christ sees before the fall is over. Christ responds before despair wins. Christ reaches before the bottom. There are hearts that are not just tired. They are wounded from trying to control everything for too long. They planned too much, anticipated too much, carried too much, and when they finally reached their limit, they discovered that the human heart was never meant to be the throne of its own security. That throne belongs to God. And while fear sits there, the soul will remain restless. The good news is that Jesus does not ask for perfect faith. He asks for real surrender. He does not require you to have all the answers. He asks for enough trust to say, "Lord, I cannot do this on my own." That kind of prayer carries power, because when the soul stops pretending, grace begins to work more deeply. And make no mistake, this is not positive thinking. It is not spiritual self-help. It is an ancient and living truth. In Philippians 4, Paul connects prayer, supplication, gratitude, and peace. That means the anxious heart is not healed by trying to look strong, but by repeatedly placing itself before God until His presence retrains the mind and calms the inner life. But there is still one final conflict. Anxiety always returns with new voices, new possibilities, new scenarios, new fears. And that is why victory in Christ must be nurtured daily. It is not enough to win one night. You must learn how to rest again in the morning. It is not enough to overcome one attack. You must remain in communion when the next thought rises. This is where everything changed for many men and women of faith. The moment they discovered that Jesus' peace was not only for one situation, but for life itself. And that peace is not fragile. It guards the mind. It protects the heart. It remains when logic fails and emotions are exhausted. Christ's promise is not small. He did not just say He would give momentary relief. He spoke of a peace that surpasses understanding, a peace able to guard the heart and mind. That is more than comfort. It is inner protection. It is God standing watch over what anxiety tries to invade. Picture an ancient fortress surrounded by enemies. The walls hold, the guards stay alert, the gates do not give way. That is how the peace of God works in the life of the one who yields to Him. Thoughts may attack, memories may persist, fears may try to return, but the presence of the Lord establishes a supernatural guard over the inner world. That does not mean the battle disappears in a magical instant. It means you no longer fight alone. There is companionship in the struggle. There is direction in confusion. There is strength when the body wants to give up. And often, the deepest healing comes not when everything around you changes, but when the heart learns to rest, even while everything is still moving. Anxiety wants the impossible, total control of tomorrow. Jesus offers something much better: trust in the Father of today and tomorrow. He teaches us to live one day at a time, because grace also comes one day at a time. The bread is daily. The care is daily, the presence is daily, and that divine rhythm breaks the cycle of anticipation that consumes the soul. Remember Elijah, exhausted, running, emptied out, on the edge of collapse. God did not destroy him for being tired. God fed him, strengthened him, and led him forward again. There is something deeply comforting in that. The Lord does not treat the afflicted as disposable. He restores, strengthens, and reorients. He knows the limits of our endurance better than we do. And here is a truth that must be said clearly. There is no shame in needing healing. There is no shame in admitting fear. There is no shame in saying the mind is overwhelmed. Shame begins when we pretend everything is fine while the soul is crying out for help. Jesus never rejected the broken. He always welcomed those who came to him honestly. Maybe that is exactly what you need today. Not an answer to everything, but a hand to hold you while you learn to trust. And that hand has already been extended. That hand is still extended. That hand still saves from sinking, still calms the storm, and still heals the broken inside. But the climax is still ahead, because now we need to hear, clearly and directly, the final call of Jesus to the weary heart. And when that voice echoes, no anxiety can remain sovereign. There are moments when truth has to be spoken without hesitation. You were not created to live in constant distress. You were not designed to be devoured by tomorrow. You were not made to carry alone what only God can sustain. Jesus is calling you closer, not to an empty religion, not to spiritual performance, not to a desperate attempt to look strong. He is calling you to rest, to trust, to intimacy, to a peace the world cannot produce and fear cannot destroy. This is the highest point of the story. Christ does not merely understand your pain, he enters it. Christ does not merely observe your anxiety, he confronts it with love and authority. As Christ does not merely promise rest, he himself becomes rest for the soul that hides in him. So if your heart has been racing, hear this carefully. You do not need to stay trapped in that state. You can pray, you can surrender, you can confess fear without shame, you can ask for help, you can turn your eyes back to Jesus as many times as needed, and every time you do, you are choosing truth over oppression. Healing may not come like thunder. It may come like quiet peace. It may come like a lighter breath. It may come like the strength to take the next step. But however it comes through the presence of Christ, because he still heals those who seek him sincerely. And now, the ending has to be said with weight. Anxiety is not your master. Fear is not your destiny. The storm is not your identity. If Jesus is who he says he is, then even the chaos inside you can bow to his voice. There are nights when the mind seems unable to rest even for a second. The body is lying down, but the soul is still standing, watching dangers that may not even exist. And it is exactly in that dark territory that anxiety finds room to grow. It turns possibilities into threats, doubts into verdicts, small signs into imagined disasters. The heart begins to live as if it were surrounded, even when nothing has happened yet. But the Bible does not ignore that kind of suffering. It exposes it honestly and places it before the light of God. David knew the weight of inner unrest. The Psalms show a man who cried, feared, trembled, and still kept speaking to the Lord. That alone is a revelation. True faith is not the absence of conflict, but the decision to bring conflict to God instead of hiding from it. There is something powerful about learning to pray when the mind is close to collapse, because prayer is not just a list of requests. It is an act of surrender. It is the moment when the heart stops leaning on its own control and begins to rest in the character of God. And when that happens, anxiety loses ground, not because the problems disappeared, but because the center of life changed. Maybe you have lived through this many times. You thought too much. You felt too much. You anticipated too much. And by the end of the day, you realized fear had consumed the energy that should have been used to live. Anxiety steals the present because it forces the soul to inhabit a future that has not yet arrived. And that is a silent prison, a prison with no visible bars, but very real chains. Jesus came precisely to break prisons like that. When he entered human history, he did not only touch people sick in body, but also those broken on the inside. He was not afraid of emotional suffering. He did not pull away from tears, despair, or deep exhaustion. Everywhere there was pain, he did something that revealed the nature of the kingdom. He drew near. Think about that for a moment. The world often withdraws from those who are overwhelmed. God does the opposite. He bends down. He draws near. He calls by name. And when Jesus' voice reaches the anxious heart, something begins to loosen, not theatrically, but in a real, deep, and transforming way. There is a difference between temporary relief and true healing. Relief may come through distraction, a good piece of news, or a moment of rest. But healing comes when the root of fear is addressed, and the root of fear is often the feeling that we are alone. Jesus destroys that lie with his presence. He is near when no one notices. He sustains when no one can help. He remains when everything else fails. And this is where the story takes on new weight, because the presence of Christ is not only comfort, it is authority. It is government over the soul. It is the living declaration that chaos does not have the final word. Before fear becomes despair, God has already seen it. Before the tear falls, he already knows the weight behind it. Before the mind forms its darkest sentence, the Lord already knows the name of the battle. That changes everything, because anxiety often begins with the illusion that we are invisible. But the God of Scripture is not blind, not distant, and not indifferent. The Bible is full of scenes where God sees what no one else saw. He saw Hagar in the wilderness. He saw Hannah in her anguish. He saw Jacob wounded, exhausted, and marked by a night of wrestling. He saw Israel oppressed in Egypt. He saw Elijah beneath a tree, drained and on the verge of collapse. In each of those scenes, God's answer was not contempt, but care. That care is part of healing, because the anxious heart recovers when it discovers that it is being seen with mercy, not merely evaluated with coldness. God does not look at our weakness with impatience. He looks at it with purpose. What seems unstable to us is, to him, a place where grace can work more clearly. Maybe your struggle has been exactly this. On the outside, everything seems to keep moving. On the inside, everything seems to be falling apart. You try to keep up the appearance of stability, but inside there is a battlefield. The mind races, the chest tightens, breathing becomes shallow, and then comes that feeling that everything could collapse at any moment. But the good news of the gospel is that life does not stand on your strength, but on God's faithfulness. When Jesus speaks about the birds of the air and the lilies of the field, he is not offering poetry to distract a hurting soul. He is reorienting the vision. He is teaching the heart to measure reality by the Father's care, not merely by the pressure of the moment. Because if God cares for creation with such attention, how much more will he care for those who belong to him? That question has to be taken seriously, not because it is too simple, but because it is too deep. Anxiety always asks, what if I run out? What if I can't handle it? What if I lose control? The gospel answers, the Father already knows what you need. That sentence does not erase the problem, but it removes the problem's power to rule the soul. There is a mystery here. The human heart looks for security in unstable things. Money, approval, predictability, health, routine, reputation. All of those may matter, but none of them are eternal. Jesus points us to something greater, a security that does not depend on perfect circumstances because it is grounded in God Himself. That means the peace of Christ is not fragile. It does not depend on an interruption-free schedule, a comfortable bank account, or a favorable diagnosis. It is born from reconciliation between the soul and the Lord. And when that reconciliation happens, anxiety begins to lose its throne. Surrender is not giving up. Surrender is recognizing that the weight is bigger than our hands can hold. It is different from escape. It is different from denial. It is a conscious act of faith. When you surrender your worry to God, you are not saying nothing matters. You are saying that God matters more than the fear trying to dominate your life. Many people suffer because they want to solve everything before they pray. They want to understand everything before they trust. They want to feel everything before they obey. But biblical faith almost never begins with total clarity. It begins with a step. It begins with a voice. It begins with a decision to follow, even without seeing all the answers. Abraham went without knowing where he was going. Moses returned to Egypt, even while feeling incapable. Gideon moved forward despite insecurity. And Mary answered God's call without control in the future. In every one of these cases, surrender made room for God to act. And that is true for the anxious heart too. While you try to hold everything, the soul grows exhausted. When you surrender, grace begins to sustain. There is a quiet strength in saying, "Lord, I cannot carry this by myself." That prayer, so simple, can begin a deep change, because God does not despise broken honesty. He responds to it. What He seeks is not flawless performance, but an open heart. Think of Jesus in Gethsemane. There, on the heaviest night, He also knew deep anguish. Sweat fell like drops of blood. The weight of the mission was crushing, and still He prayed. He did not run. He did not harden Himself. He did not step away from the Father. He surrendered. And by doing so, He showed that prayer is not a sign of weakness, but of trust in the middle of the abyss. That teaches something precious to the troubled heart. You do not have to pretend to be strong to be loved by God. You do not have to hide collapse in order to deserve care. Jesus has already entered the place of human pain and knows from the inside what it means to suffer under extreme pressure. That is why, when He invites the weary, He speaks not as someone distant, but as one who truly understands the weight of the soul. And when that truth enters us, fear begins to weaken, not because it disappears instantly, but because it loses its main lie, that the pain will last forever and that you are alone in it. You're not. The Lord is present, and that presence is stronger than the storm. Anxiety does not live only from tomorrow. It also feeds on what has already happened. Old wounds can come back as if they had just happened. Hurtful words keep echoing. Rejections keep shaping decisions. Old failures whisper that the future will simply repeat the fall. That is why Jesus' healing must also reach memory. He does not only heal the symptom of the moment, He touches the whole story. He looks at the past without fear, because no trauma is too big for His mercy. No memory is too deep to be illuminated by His truth. No pain is too old to have exhausted His power to restore. That matters because many people are trapped not by what is in front of them, but by what is behind them. The heart learns to expect the worst because it has been wounded too many times. And then anxiety becomes a kind of armor, even if it is painful. The soul thinks, if I worry in advance, maybe it will hurt less later. But that's a cruel lie. Worry does not protect, it exhausts. Jesus, on the other hand, does not feed that prison. He opens a way into a new way of living. He teaches that life does not have to be defined by trauma, and the future does not have to be ruled by scars. The cross proves it. At the cross, the past was confronted, sin was dealt with, guilt was carried, shame was exposed and defeated. The power of death was disarmed. If the cross reached the core of the human condition, then it can also reach the root of our anxiety. Because the gospel is not only about future forgiveness, it is about present restoration. It is about a God who enters broken history and writes a new possibility into it. Maybe you are still waiting for a very big sign. Maybe you want undeniable proof that you will be cared for. But the greatest proof has already been given. Christ died and rose again. If he did not abandon us at the cross, he will not abandon us in the valley. If he conquered death, he can also conquer the darkness that tries to steal your peace. That is why the healing of anxiety begins when the soul learns to look at the cross not as a distant symbol, but as a final declaration of love. There is the answer to guilt. There is the answer to fear. There is the answer to the feeling of abandonment. Everything that said, "You are alone," was confronted by a wounded, living, and reigning Savior. There is a rest that the world tries to imitate but can never give. It does not depend on vacations, external silence, or favorable circumstances. It is born from the deep trust that God is still God when life feels unstable. That is the rest Jesus offers. It is not just a pause in the struggle, it is a new way of walking through it. You still have responsibilities, challenges, decisions, and pressure, but now there is a difference. The center of your soul no longer has to be ruled by anxiety. It can be guarded by the peace of Christ. That is extraordinary because true rest is not empty. It is filled with God's presence. It is not an escape from reality. It is sustaining power inside it. It is not a denial of suffering. It is the certainty that suffering has not defeated the Lord of life. Maybe your mind still tries to return to the old pattern. Maybe fear still tries to raise its voice. But today, a greater truth is being proclaimed over you. Jesus can heal your worry and your anxiety. He can replace the tightness with trust, the collapse with firmness, exhaustion with peace, chaos with holy rest. The question is not whether the storm exists. The question is, who is at the center of it? If Christ is present, then the storm is not sovereign. If Christ speaks, then fear is not king. If Christ sustains, then your story does not end in panic. So receive this word with reverence. You can rest, not because everything around you has already been fixed, but because the Lord is still in control. And when He reigns, even the most restless heart finds room to breathe again. Today, carry this certainty with you. Jesus can heal your worry and your anxiety, and your peace can still be restored in depth, truth, and power. If this message spoke to you, subscribe, leave your prayer in the comments, and share this video with someone who needs to find rest in Christ.